Welcome to Go Bookmark. Today, we're privileged to have with us a polymath of sorts. Vinod Raman Nair is a filmmaker, historian, researcher, producer, scholar, and of course, a writer. Acclaimed for his screenplays like the critically well-received Marathi film Zone, as well as the direction of several documentaries like The Chest and short films like Indisposable Choker, Mr. Nair is a true and thoroughbred filmman. After a myriad of adventures like shooting across the war-torn Gaza Strip, traveling across the globe, and exploring over 6 languages as a writer, Mr. Nair has come out with his first novel, the introduction to his trilogy and a historical fiction set in the 9th century Islamic Caliphate. He's here to introduce it to all of us. A hearty welcome to you, Mr. Nair. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm fine. I'm fine.
So without further ado, let's just get on with the questions. So my first question for you is, how did you first stumble upon authorhood after dabbling into so many different art forms, and how has that journey been?
Oh, you see, as a great man has said, that the destiny of ice is always to end up as water. So, similarly, any writer, there were times when writing has always been a craft from age memorial, since time memorial. And cinema came in very later. When in this particular context, what I feel is it is the story that came to me first. And, it chose its own medium rather than me choosing to become an author. It was the story who chose its medium, to be very honest. And secondly, what happened was, see, when a storyteller basically can opt to various mediums to tell his story. It could be a theater form, it could be a painting, it could be a song, it could be a short story, it could be a book, it could be anything. But what happens is, it is the story that chooses, which medium will be most effective to actually say it. Now, when it came to this particular story, see what happened. Even it was very luring. I was very lured to make this into a film. I even was inspired by my friends to go and bounce it to some people. But then when I stopped and looked back, I was little skeptical about certain things. And that was basically quelled by a very dear friend of mine whose name is Kashyap, who is also a producer, an upcoming producer. And when I reflected this upon him, he told me the true medium of telling this story would be to write a book on it. That's because, see, what happens is most of the historicals which are made, what happens is a lot of details get lost. If I try to give you an example, when you read a Harry Potter and the way Harry Potter has been made, what happens is a lot of small details, fine details get lost in transit. And particularly in this story, that would have basically, challenged my very intent of writing this book. If I would have had to throw all those into a bin when I'm writing a story, when I'm making a film out of it. So that's why I thought, yes, book is the right way of doing it. And see, writing a book, see, I tell you, I was born to an era which was completely devoid of any satellite explosion, satellite TV, and for that matter, we didn't have this 24/7 TV during that time. And books were the best companions during that time. And, my father also, encouraged me, motivated me to read a lot. And that is why the kind of consumption of books which happened during my youth was terrific, actually. It was like you were absorbing a lot of data during that time, and you were reading a large plethora of writers and thinkers. During that childhood, itself and towards my youth, there was always this, a dream of writing my own book someday. But what happened was, when I stepped into my youth, liberalization happened. I was born into a socialist era. You understand? So what happened was everybody was very career pushing. Everybody wanted to make a career, and born to a middle class family. My parents always thought, writing is not a profession. It could be a hobby. It cannot be a profession. So they started pushing me. And when I was smitten by the movie magic, what happened was the idea of becoming an author, that remained nascent inside me, somewhere inside me, because I was trying to tell stories in another way. So, I was feeling happy that, I was telling stories. And during that time, I felt, and certainly even today, I feel movie magic certainly is one of the most powerful mediums of telling a story. But provided you use that medium in an effective way.
That's great.
Yeah.
So the next question is, all writers, of course, are readers, and you're a researcher. So that goes without saying. So what are some of the authors and works of art or literature that have influenced you?
Oh my! That would be a long list. But to be very honest, see, over these 48 years which I have walked this planet, and the kind of readers I have read, there are some works which have endured inside me. They have been enduring, and I call them masters. See, I normally, as a personality as I am, I don't get influenced by people, because I am a person who believes that driving a BMW is fun, but owning a BMW could be misery. You understand? So what happens is, it's not that I don't go for a certain lifestyle, but what I'm saying is I'm not obsessed with that part. That has not never been my obsession in life. So over a period of time, see, Leo Tolstoy is one writer, and if a couple of books which sticks to me even after so many years is, you see, it's a 19th century 1852 work, Crime and Punishment. It's an epic kind of a book, Anna Karenina. These are some wonderful works which remain in my mind. One particular writer whom I still remember is Dostoevsky. See, what happens is, what I feel is, my parents were born to a more academic era. That's what I feel. See, if I look back to the black and white times, black and white cinema, there were people who were in India. Hindi films were being made on Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I don't know how many people know about it. Crime and Punishment was remade as Fir Subah Kab Hogi. You understand? But now what happens is, we don't have that kind of filmmakers today, who actually get into that space and try to really connect it to the societal, socio-economic changes today, and weave a story. We don't that doesn't happen today, because somewhere we live in an escapist era. And certainly Indian writers, wow, RK Narayan is brilliant. I like Manto, Sarat Chandra. These are some brilliant writers who have always endured with me all through this journey. And yes, they have been true inspirations. They have been great teachers. And see, more importantly, what I feel is, all these writers were very intricate in their writings about a certain era, about the reflection of a certain era. Even if you pick up a book today and you open it, you get to know what that era was. You understand? And with such a fine, detailed understanding of the socio-economic challenges at that time, and at the same time standing by the spirit of man. You understand? See, what else is history? You tell me. See, right from that childhood, I have been reflecting to history through these writers. See, because what else is history but a testimony of an era, and the kind of challenges people faced because of the events which happened during that time. So, history unconsciously has always been there somewhere around me. See, as I articulate myself, I was born to a socialist era. My youth was into the liberalization era. So, there are a lot of historical connections to it when we talk about it.
As a fellow book lover, I understand. Anna Karenina is one of my favorites. Magnificent work,
Yeah,
so vast. Yeah, anyway, so I know you said that you don't get influenced easily, but there must be some source of inspiration that you do have, some
Well,
people
see,
whom that.
inspiration is what? Inspiration is what? See, the true inspiration that you see what happens. What I feel is every individual has his own reflection about the life he or she lives. It has to be there.
Yeah,
Otherwise, see what happens is you cannot erect your own imaginations on the basis of somebody else's borrowed knowledge. You cannot erect it on a borrowed knowledge. What I'm saying is, what they inspire me to do is to give a testimony true to that era. See, Leo Tolstoy is writing during the Tsars, when the Tsar is ruling Russia. You understand? But he even criticizes, he even writes against, he writes about the tyranny of the Tsar. You understand? So, what happens is that is something which is very inspiring, which I feel has to resonate to every writer. See, a writer is basically the record keeper of every era. That's what I feel. A writer has to be a record keeper of that era. If he starts manipulating, what happens is you are on for a society of Manchurian candidates.
I agree.
So that is
Okay,
why I feel it's a very responsible job. It's a very responsible job,
yeah.
and they do inspire me a lot for that. Lot for that.
So when you're not writing, where will we find you apart from a film studio or a library or a set?
Oh well, libraries nowadays. Nobody goes to a library. You well, reading. I do read during that time. I buy a book and I read. Otherwise, I love traveling. See, what happens is this was something which I developed when I started venturing into documentary making. Because where see what happens is when you become a part of that particular historical movement happening in that place. See what happens is it gives you jitters. It takes you reel back. Very organically. So, I do that very often. I do save some money where in a year somewhere I travel, do my notes. I do, and the genesis of this book is also coincidentally, similarly, when I was visiting Turkey, during a documentary film. So, that is how the very germ of this book actually started developing, building inside me. So, traveling is something which gives me a lot of pleasure. But historical places like architecture, the kind of living, the kind of army they used to have, all these things are very very fascinating for me. Even for that matter, Pratapgarh, I had gone to Pratapgarh Fort. I tell you one wonderful thing. The guide was also surprised when I asked him that. Today you can travel in a car to the gate. You just have to climb the stairs and move in. I was wondering during that time when you didn't have all these facilities, how did these guys travel? How so fascinating. How they used to travel in some up and down from that fort, and then and it has been fantastic. So, these are some things which fascinate me a lot.
Right. But there's no denying that you're a prolific filmmaker and a passionate student of history, obviously. So how do these experiences factor into your writing?
Well, see, what happens is, unfortunately, history, I personally feel, has not been given fair justice when it comes to cinema in India. There were a few filmmakers in the yesteryears who were researchers and who had good command in film, in the language of filmmaking. But what happens is when you don't have that kind of a research, and liberalization, I also felt, did one great harm to our society, especially. That's where, we started building on prejudices. on people, on events. We started looking at it in our own ways. So what happened, and as it is, in our houses, in our households, we are never encouraged to get into research. They always say, study this, study that, build a career on marks. That's how we are oriented actually. So that doesn't come very automatically into any person. So, what I sensed was making a film on one personality means, if I want to show that A is a great man, I have to bash B. That is how history, filmmaking, historicals in India, unfortunately, modern day India, has turned out into. Now, what happens is, when I did a small research on it, I realized that, as you you wanted to draw two different spheres, where student of history and filmmaking. Now, what happens is, in and being a student of history, there is no economics involved, but in filmmaking, there is economics involved. So that's what pushes the people to get into the easy way out, where they feel that this will get in some kind of accolades. There will be some monies which will come in, but what I feel is, a true historical is yet to be made in India. Why I feel, and this particular question is very important for me. That's because my first film in my life was 1983 Gandhi, made by Richard Attenborough. Because I was born to a very conservative family, where conservative South Indian family, where films were an abomination. I was not allowed to see films, and I was told that films were a taboo at my place. This was coincident. It was a coincidence that in my school, when Gandhi was released, it was shown in my school, and that was the first movie which I ever saw in my life. And coincidentally, that was also historical. And over my growing days, I realized that that film actually left an indelible imprint inside me, where a filmmaker's job is to make not a personal statement. Your personal prejudices should not come when a filmmaker is making a historical. That's what I feel. It should be basically setting up a record of what were the events. Yes, it has to be entertaining, so you add a little bit of drama and all. See, but do you think all these historical characters lived devoid of drama? Everybody have their own emotional needs. Every individual has their own dramatic needs. So even they had that bet. So, but unfortunately, we still have to learn that way of approaching things, which I feel Westerners have successfully done it, barring a few. When it comes to topics related to Jews, the West is little biased. Otherwise, they have been fair enough when it comes to historical contexts. So I think we still are growing in that space. We need to improve a lot. We have not
Right.
even started up. I feel.
So let's talk about the elements of fiction. So, what narrative devices and literary techniques did you make use of while writing this novel? And have you ever tried out other genres and forms of writing?
So, well, to be very honest, see, techniques and methods. See, I've not been a person who has ever believed in methods.
Right.
Now, let me ask you a very simple question. You are asking questions, but let me ask you a very simple question. Very simple question. Where does the sun rise from?
The E.
See, now what happens is, the sun never rises from the east.
Yeah.
The place from where the sun rises, we call it the east. You understand? It is a hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's a hypothesis. So what happens is, for me, all these rules, these methods, these techniques are all hypotheses. What I feel is, when an individual, see what happens, these makes a situation very difficult for you. When an idea germinates inside you, and it titillates you to the edge, where you feel that I don't even write immediately, to be very honest. That idea has to push me to that brink, that come on, spit me out. Only then I actually think of writing it, to be very honest. So what happens, methods I've never followed in life. methods I have never followed, and genres. See, it's not that only history also has a lot of genres. You know, see the next immediate book which is coming out. See what happened. It's basically the second installment of this book which I've written, which I have been working on for some time now. But because of this COVID restrictions, my small trip to Iran, that got cancelled. Yeah, there was a little bit of research which I wanted to do, which I couldn't, which had to be postponed. So maybe I travel there in February, but in between that, what I've done is I have finished one manuscript very recently, which is basically a biofiction. You understand, when you talk about genres, what I have, my second book which is coming out is basically of a genre biofiction. What I've done is I've chosen a historical event, a true historical event, and I have planted my fictitious character in the middle of that event. You understand? If I can if I can give you a very simple example, that was Hey Ram by Kamal sir. Kamal Hassan made Hey Ram. That was basically the Sakit Ram's character was placed inside that story of Godse's assassination of Gandhi. So similarly, what I'm doing is I have picked up my battlefield as the Agra summit. Post Kargil war, the Agra summit. I'm coming little more recent times during the famous meeting of Mr. Vajpayee and Musharraf, which happened. And in the middle of that summit, I am placing my protagonist, and I'm trying to tell something. That's so genres. It's these are all brainchilds of intellectuals. I'm telling you, genres. Can you write this? Can you write that? See, what happens is we all are exposed to every kind of emotion, every kind of sentiment, and as we call in native language as vikaras. You understand? See, everybody can write everything because you can laugh, you can sing, you can cry at the same time. But the only thing is how much. How much does it soothe you inside? How much does it kick you inside? So I've recently I've written a comedy film now. I'm very unlike people say. People find me as a very serious person, but I've written a comedy. But comedy, see, it's very difficult to write. That's the most difficult thing to write, comedy. So let's see how it goes. Yes, genres, multiple genres have to be worked on. I think I'm open to it. It's not that I'm not.
Yeah. Also, sir,
But there will
time.
be a part of history. But there will be some sort of history even there. Some sort of history will be there. Even when you make a comedy or when you make a thriller, it enhances the backdrop.
Right. Sir, our time is running out, so we'll have to arrange
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
another
I
meeting.
understand. Okay.
Yeah, but I'll still ask you this question. So tell us something about your newest novel. So we did talk about it quite a bit, but anything more you would like
Yeah.
to add?
About my book, you said?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, see, this is basically a historical fiction told in a very different way. The idea was basically, see, 9th century caliphate, when we talk about, see, the idea spark is because whenever you go to India and talk about the Islamic Empire, see what happens, there are 3 or 4 names which comes in. A Babur, an Aurangzeb, or a Khilji. These are the few names which come up because people are not aware that these were not constituents of the Islamic Empire. Islamic Empire existed somewhere in Baghdad. And 9th century, why I picked up was it is known as the golden era, golden age of Islamic Empire because Islam during that time was a very scientific fraternity. You understand? This was during when I was referring to my visit to Turkey, where I came across a book called the Jabarian Corpus, which was and this was very randomly I came across this book and at the at the Istanbul University Library, and we were actually researching for Ottoman Empire. But when I went through this book, I first got a Latin version, then I had to procure an English translation of it because it was originally written in Arabic. I see. I knew all the time when people try to argue why you are not writing about Indians, why Muslims. We are living in difficult times. You understand? And so what happened was I told them, see, I already know that Aryabhatta discovered zero. But do you know? And I didn't know that algebra, which we all have learned, was originally algebra. It was the contribution of the Arabs, which resonated all across the world, and it turned into algebra. One of the first clocks made in the world were made by Arabs. So, what happened was this was something which kicked me a lot, because most of the times when we hear about the Islamic Empire, it is a lot of brutality, a lot of cruelty, and a lot of my Muslim friends, they also feel somewhere bogged down because of the kind of environment around. Whenever you talk about a Muslim, it is synonymous to a terrorist. So I also want to tell them that, guys, come on, get up. You have a very fantastic legacy here. Come on, you need to read about this. You need to talk about this. You guys were very scientific people. And the kind of feedbacks also I got, I felt very gratified. So but I wanted to weave it in a way which is very entertaining. See, when I'm talking information, readers get bored.
Yeah.
See, what happens is that is why people run away from history. See, Mr. Shashi Tharoor wrote a fantastic book, Era of Darkness. But the problem is, I enjoyed it, but it didn't resonate to the bottom of the pyramid. And those are the people who are most vulnerable when it comes to history. So I wanted to write it where even a 13-year-old can enjoy it with a kind of adventure, with a kind of action. So that's how I decided to write the book in that way. So it's a very entertaining book. It's a very entertaining book, like an Indiana Jones, where you have an adventurer and three autocrats, through the technocrats, sorry, coming from various parts of the world, coming together to find an artifact. Now, what is that artifact? This artifact is basically an emerald stone, which was given to the 9th century Khalifa when he was a young boy by the Roman Empress. And this stone is supposed to have a lot of occult powers, and somewhere it got lost in history. And as I told you, I want to say this story of history, this part of history in an entertaining way. So I have my 3 heroes and 1 supervillain.
Yeah.
You understand? So, what happens is, so that's how the entertainment comes in. And I've tried to devise a lot of riddles, a lot of puzzles, introducing languages as tools to decode certain events, to make it entertaining. And towards the last part of my book, I have completely dedicated it to the Arabian Nights.
Oh,
because
wow.
Arabian Nights were basically created during this golden age of the Islamic Empire, the 9th century. And as I told you about my childhood during a socialist era, Arabian Nights were the Harry Potter of my times. When I was growing up, it was my Harry Potter. That's the kind of dedication I have given it to. This is basically what my book is. It's very entertaining. At the same time, I'm trying to take you through history.
That's great. So our second last question is about your writing process. Every writer has his own process. What's yours?
See, I normally follow my instincts. As I said, these are all definitions created by intellectuals. And even for movie making, I've never followed these processes. See, it's basically, as I told you in my first response, that when it came to this book, it was the story. We chose its medium.
Yeah.
Similarly, what happens is it is very instinctive. How do I start it? What should be my first scene? What should be the treatment? It's, see, when you start getting into the characters and the story, they themselves lead you there. To be very honest, there are some times when you hit a clutter, which they call as the writer's block. But what happens is that time I completely come out of it. I have never pushed myself. See, that is why I have had to invest 3 years into this book. This was my first book. It took me 2 years of research, pure research. In films in India would not afford this kind of research
Yeah.
for a film. You understand? So it took me patient 3 years to actually come out with this book. So what happens is you need to have that patience when you want to write something like this. It's certainly not easy. I'm telling you, and out of my experience, I would have written a number of screenplays in between that. But it was very enjoyable. It was very enjoyable. It is very difficult for me to say, what process was first, what process was second. Well, when the story came, I wanted to write about it. I was very kicked because of the kind of environment we are living these days. I felt that somebody needs to talk about it.
Yeah.
And talk about what? See, it is not about creating a controversy. The idea was basically somewhere because of people who have been groomed in a certain kind of way where um, uh, they are completely oblivious of any kind of research in life. What happens that the byproduct is basically a very vulnerable society where which can be influenced, which can be taken to another path by a simple WhatsApp message. And you become a victim of it. That's because you have no research. When the time was there, you felt that अरे किसको पढ़ी है यार, history को छोड़ो गोली मारो. No, I'm not saying that everybody has to get into history. What I'm saying is see, history, read it like a comic book. Na? Read it at least like a comic and try to know what that event had an effect on me today. See, because what is, and there was one thing very clear in my mind, that approaching history has to be done in a very, very different manner. That was, it was for me, history is not about personalities. For me, history is not about timelines. So if you get into my book, there will be not more than 10 timelines which have been set. There are no timelines in every page, to actually bother my readers. What I am trying to say is, history is an understanding of great civilizations which walk this planet, and their contributions to the world, which actually served for future civilizations to take it forward. You understand? So how understanding it through these civilizations help us to understand where the world was and the journey to where we stand. You understand? So I want to approach history that way. Because the moment you talk about personalities, your prejudices come in, and then there is a war which erupts. I don't want to get into that. That is why I said, let us approach it this way, and let's have fun. At the same time, travel through history. So that these were the things which I actually had in my mind, and I took care of when I was getting into writing the book. Otherwise, the characters and everything, see what happens is any writer for that matter, when you write, those characters will be reflections of something which might be an experience. There might be something inside you which comes into a character. It happens when a writer actually approaches any kind of work. Those will be there, but there are no specific processes which I actually got into to write the book.
And final question: do you have any parting word of advice for our readers, writers, everyone who wants to read?
So this is something which who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
You're someone
Anyway,
we
see,
look up to.
this is not an advice. This is not an advice. I'll just share what I have believed all the time. From the time when I ventured into writing, I always feel great writers. See, first of all, there are no big writers. time that great writers have two things in common. Number one, they don't want to be praised; they want to be understood. And number two, they don't write for the upper elite class. This is only what I would like to share with my any budding writer. You know, and when this is an era, this is an age where the society needs writers.
Yeah.
See, I've always felt, because whenever I have traveled, one small experience I will share, and then I will stop. A couple of lines. When I had traveled to Ukraine, I was so taken aback. That's because the young guys, the young girls and boys who were working around and at the same time studying, I found that society was so academic. Academic is always misunderstood. Academic का मतलब ये नहीं है कि you always take up books and roam around. That's not what I'm saying. They are encouraged. See, every square in Ukraine is basically has a statue of a writer, a thinker, or a philosopher. You understand? That itself reflects that the society is run by thinkers, research, think, opine. It is that kind of a free society.
Yeah.
Where your opinions are valued. So that is what I also dream that India becomes someday, rather than be being too oversensitive about anything that anyone says. So I feel we need writers and thinkers. That is something which we miss in today's India. Is what I think.
Thank you so much for being with us. And it was great talking to you. I learned so
Thank
much
you.
more.
Oh, thank you. Same here. It was my pleasure.
And I'm so looking forward to your book. We did receive a digital manuscript, so we'll be reading
Sure.
that soon. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.